Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. We've all been creeped out by things lurking in the shadows. But what if it is the shadow itself that we need to fear? What if the entities that creep in the darkness get a little too close, reaching out with bony fingers or leering a little too long with dead eyes? The following are 3 stories submitted to us by viewers and subscribers of strange but true stories with their unsettling experiences with the shadow people. It nearly grabbed me. It was the summer of 1989 when I first saw death. At least, that is what I think the shadow entity was. I was an 11-year-old that loved scary stories, having scoured through the stacks of books in my elementary school library over the previous few years, and I thought that I was well prepared for tales told by the campfire. An overnight camp out with the day camp I was enrolled in sounded fun, with silly skits to perform and time to hang out with the other kids I had met during a week's worth of crafts and hiking. It was during dinner that my first sighting took place. The parents had already left for the night, and dusk had settled over the forested hills that surrounded the campfire. Our sleeping bags were all laid out on a nearby field, and I was joking around on a wooden stage that only 30 to 40 minutes prior we had been performing on. I just happened to glance down and saw a black hand reaching for my ankle. So I hopped away from it and knelt down to see who had tried to grab me. I had laughed at first, as I just assumed that one of the other kids was trying to play a prank on me. But there was no one behind the stage. Then I felt something staring at me from my left. I looked up, and standing on a picnic table was a tall, robed man wearing a crown. Only it wasn't human. It was totally black. Blacker than black. Its form was an endless void in the shape of a man, and it was staring at me. I've thought about this in the many years that have passed. I remember feeling that it was not just staring at me, but all of me. Everything that I had been, everything that I was, everything that I could be, it was staring into my soul with a gaze filled with malevolence. And I was terrified. I began to scream at it, trying to move so it would stop looking at me. I yelled at it to stop looking at me. The camp counselors ran over to see what was going on, but they couldn't see it. Only I could see the figure composed of utter darkness that stood there before me, and that only added to the fear. One of the counselors turned me away from the entity in an attempt to calm me down. When I looked back over my shoulder, it was gone. I spent the rest of that night feeling like I was being watched and filled with a sense of unease. I had confronted something I didn't understand and fearfully yelled at it in defiance instead of just backing down. I jumped at shadows for months afterwards, expecting another hand to reach for me. It was towards Christmas of that year that I saw it for a second time. This time in broad daylight, standing next to a bank of payphones in the mall. This time it wasn't staring at me, but at one of my parents. I was frightened, but not as frightened as before. I tried to point it out to my parents, but again, they couldn't see it. My mother suggested it was there for my father, and my father suggested it was there for my mother. I just kept walking with them to the next store, not wanting the shadow man to look at me again. It must have been early 1991 when the entity returned for a third visit. I was home in bed. It came out of my ceiling, right above the fish tank, only this time it was garbed all in white. It silently floated down and then towards my bed. I don't know why, but I was compelled to say, "Take me when the time is right." It only hovered there for a moment before moving back along the path it had just taken, rising back into my bedroom ceiling. It repeated this process again, only this time totally composed of an insubstantial gray. Again, I was compelled to say, "Take me when the time is right." And again, it moved back and returned into my ceiling. It then came down a third time, composed of the same black void it had been the previous 2 times I had seen it. Only this time, when it floated to my bed, I remained silent. It then moved back and returned to the ceiling. The entire process had felt almost ritualistic in its execution and tone. Once it had left that third time, I was free to do as I pleased. I got out of bed and tried to tell my father what had just happened. He told me to get back to bed, as it had most likely just been a dream. But he also insisted that I say the rosary before going to sleep. Shortly after this incident, my parents had a horrible fight, and my father kicked both my mom and me out of the house. My mother began divorce procedures, and my father committed suicide that spring. The day he died, he came to say goodbye. He didn't take his hand out of his pocket the entire time he was there. A neighbor later told us that they had seen my father checking the ammunition in a handgun before coming into the house we were staying in. If my sister had been there, I think he would have shot all of us. He tried to talk my mother into letting him bring me back to the house to help him work on the truck, he said, though he had never shown any interest in having me help with car repair in the past. My mother told him no. If she had said yes, I believe I would have died that day. Almost 30 minutes after he left, he called and tried to convince my mother to bring me to the house. Again, he tried the same excuse, and again, she told him no. If she had said yes, I am convinced he would have shot both of us. 3 sightings of death and 3 very close brushes where events outside my control would have led to my death. I don't know what would have happened if that hand had grabbed me that night in the woods in 1989, but I am fairly certain I would not be alive today. Shadows in the Sanctuary. I work as a youth liaison at a church in Boulder City, Nevada. It was late, and I was the only one at the church. As part of the job, I stay in an apartment in the church and look after the place at night. I was talking with my girlfriend, Ruby, on the phone, which I did every night using the Facebook Messenger call feature. We were having an argument when I heard the sound of jingling keys over by the church offices, and then I heard the organ playing in the main sanctuary. That was weird. I was the only person who was supposed to be in the building. I went to check the offices, but I found nothing. The doors to the sanctuary were locked, and as I approached, the music stopped. Going further into the rest of the church, I saw a black figure rapidly run past a doorway on the other side of the room I was standing in front of. I called out to see if anyone was there. No answer. I walked down the hallway that leads to the nursery, thinking this person might be hiding in there. When I reached the nursery, I saw it. It was more than 6 feet tall, but it wasn't human. It had bright yellow eyes, the kind of yellow you would see on car headlights, and they were really bright. I panicked and ran as fast as I could back to the room where I was staying, closed the door, and picked up the phone. Ruby had begun to drift off as I had searched the church. I yelled at her to wake up. She asked what was wrong. I described what I had seen, and she did a quick online search. She said possibly I had seen a shadow person, and said that they watch people. After that, things ramped up quite a bit. I found it hard to sleep at this point, considering what I had already seen. I had the door to the room I was staying in closed. As I was sitting there looking towards the door, I saw the entity's eyes cross in front of the windows, and it pushed on the door, but not hard enough to make the stack of Bibles I had propped up against it to fall. The entity continued down the hall, and I let a little time pass. I remembered I hadn't had anything to eat in a while, and I was getting really hungry. I decided to take a chance, leaving the relative safety of my room, sneaking out and into the kitchen to make myself some oatmeal. I was eating my oatmeal there in the kitchen and had put my headphones on to listen to some music. That's when I heard someone, or something, say in my headphones, "I see you." The voice was light, like a child's, but raspy, like something was wrong with its throat. That freaked me out. As if things couldn't get any stranger, I pulled off my headphones and put my bowl down. I saw something odd out of the corner of my eye. It was a dog. Its hair was mangy and unkempt and silver gray, shiny silver gray. How did it get in here? How did it get in the church? All the doors were closed and locked and had been for many hours. I started speaking calmly to it. I was good with dogs and quite comfortable around them. But as I got up to walk over and check its collar to see if it had an owner's tag, the dog started growling at me. That was odd, as dogs never did that to me unless they were abused and hated others. The dog's eyes were fiery red. I ran from the kitchen, slamming the door behind me and running back to my living area again. I closed that door and piled some more stuff against the door to give myself some comfort. I was out of breath. I realized a few moments later that in my haste to leave the kitchen and get away from the mangy dog, I left my phone charger on the table and my phone was quickly dying. I was thinking of going back to get it when I noticed that the lights that had been on in the kitchen when I left it were now off. I knew I had not turned off the lights. I took a moment to collect myself. Ruby was still on the phone with me, and I told her I was exhausted. But before I tried to get some sleep, I needed to go to the restroom, and I decided to go across the street to the convenience store to use their facilities. On my way back to the church, I saw 3 more shadow figures and a smallish figure scuttling towards me. Was my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't pause long enough to consider that thought. I sprinted back to the church and my room. I didn't sleep at all that night and waited until the sun rose and the church office opened up the next morning. Bright light, shadowy figure. When I was 12 years old, my granddad died of cancer on the 21st of August, 2011. A few weeks before he passed away, he was in the hospital, and my family decided we needed to stay over with my grandmother to keep her company, comfort her through this tough time, and help out around the house. My granny lives in an old house. The people who live in the houses near her are all retired, so as you expect, not much goes on in the area. My granny lives on a farm, and when we stay over, since I'm the oldest of 3 kids, I usually get a room to myself. My room is at the end of a hall, and the only other rooms in that section of the house is a living room, which nobody has used since my mom was a kid, and a bathroom. My granny's room is at the other end of the house, as is my brother's, sister's, and mother's room. There is also the main bathroom there that everyone typically uses. In essence, there's no reason for anyone to come to my side of the house and down my hall. After dark, my hall is empty, except for me. While this used to be a working farm, it no longer was, and the only animals we had around were a dog and a few cats that stayed outside. The night of August 20th, a day before my grandfather passed away, it was a clear, calm night with no clouds. There was no moon either, just bright stars in the sky. I fell asleep in my bed and was awakened suddenly at 3 a.m. There was a black, shadowy figure at the end of my bed. I got the feeling that whatever this figure was, it wasn't supposed to be there. I mean, a shadowy figure is not supposed to be standing at the end of anybody's bed in the middle of the night, but more to the point that it wasn't there for me. But I felt its eyes boring a hole through me, deep into my soul. I sat up in bed and just kept staring at it. Was it a figment of my imagination? Light playing tricks with objects in my room? I didn't think so, and I was too frightened to move towards it to find out for sure. After staring at it for what felt like years, but was more than likely no more than half a minute, it disappeared from my room. I was certainly freaked out about the whole incident, and it took me a while longer to muster the courage to head to the bathroom to splash water on my face, convincing myself that I had imagined the whole scene. When I was standing in front of the sink about to splash water on my face, a bright light engulfed the bathroom window. The bright light dissipated, and in its place outside the window I could see another shadowy figure, but not the one that had been in my room a few minutes before. This was a hooded figure that kind of looked like the Grim Reaper, even though I don't believe in that sort of thing. To a 12-year-old, this was extremely scary. Heck, I imagine for a person of any age that sight would cause a fright. At that point, the dog started going crazy, barking outside the bathroom window. This was a massive sheepdog that had been trained to handle much bigger animals. Then I heard the cats hissing. These cats were mostly feral and weren't scared of anything. The figure turned its head briefly and stared right at me. I got the same feeling I had in my room that this, whatever it wasn't meant to be there, and the same feeling of eyes pouring right into my soul. I just saw complete blackness where the face would have been if it was a person. My mind was whirring, looking for a logical answer. Could it be a person out for a walk? Not at 3 a.m. Again, the people who lived nearby were all elderly folks that would not be wandering around at this time, and I can't think of any that were really capable of doing that to begin with, even in the daylight. Again, I was frozen with fear. If the animals outside weren't going crazy, I could have passed it off as my imagination again. But these animals weren't scared much of anything, and I had never heard them react quite this way before. I have never been as frightened as I was at that moment. After a few more minutes, I retreated to the other side of the house where the rest of my family was and spent the remainder of the night on the couch. My family brought my grandfather home from the hospital later that day, and he passed away in the house that evening. Strangely enough, the seemingly healthy sheepdog and several of the cats died exactly 1 year later. My grandmother revealed to me a few years after that 2 children had died in the room that I slept. My grandmother's sister died of pneumonia when she was 14, and my grandmother's infant daughter had died of meningitis as a 1-year-old. It may not sound like it, but I am a full-blown skeptic. I am certain there is a logical explanation to all of this and several other strange happenings in my life. I just haven't figured it out yet. This has been Strange But True Stories. Viewers just like you submitted all 3 of these accounts to us. Has something strange happened to you that you can't quite explain? Perhaps you too have had a paranormal experience that you felt too embarrassed to tell to anyone you know. Send us your story to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. All identities are kept anonymous. Let us know what you thought of these stories in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks to those who have. I'm Steve White. Thanks for watching. Until next time.